You're welcome to the Big Talk segment of the show. I have with me Colonel Tony Nyiam. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's a familiar name in Nigerian political military history. He was one of the men who led insurgency against the Buhari regime when they wanted to sever part of the North as part of the agenda, with people like Great Ogboru, Mukoro, and so on.
Actually, Babangida regime.
Babangida regime. That's what I said something else.
It's only Buhari.
Oh, sorry, Babangida regime.
Ooh,
Yes, the Babangida regime was an April 22 coup attempt. They don't want to call it coup, we want to call it insurgency. You're welcome to this show.
Thank you.
How would you describe the nature of Nigerian federalism at the moment?
I wouldn't call it federalism. I would say we are pretending to be running a federal system of government. It's like we're pretending it's in our mood to be imposers and pretentious. And as far as I'm concerned, is that federalism without fiscal federalism is really not federalism.
What do you mean by that?
By fiscal federalism, I mean, instead of not to be too academic, to go to direct examples, was that the examples we had when I was a young boy was that each region controlled its resources and paid approximately about 50% to the center. The regions contributed. What we have today is rather an issue of the federal government takes, I would say, illegitimately from the regions and now shares.
When you say legitimately, what do you mean?
I'm making a distinction between legal and illegal. Legitimacy means that you cannot, as the present constitution indirectly makes a man who owns resources which are underneath the soil to belong to the federal government and not to the community or the people. In other words, their inalienable rights are being breached by continuous government since the military took over, like say, in the past 30 years. To that extent, I think their resources have been taken illegitimately because it is not with their consent that their resources have been taken. And centralized in a system, by that centralization, the funds so centralized is seen as no man's land. And this is one of the impetus for the kind of institutional corruption we are experiencing.
So one of the problems you have identified is the issue of a pretension to fiscal federalism.
Indeed.
And we don't have real fiscal federalism because the people who generate the wealth are not compensated for generating it.
True.
And you can say this was not the situation when we were in the regional system and so on. So what went wrong?
What went wrong was an experiment which General Gowon, to fight the civil war, decided to suspend federalism so as to have the resources to fight the war. And that suspension, which was supposed to be a temporal measure, became a permanent measure. And my former colleagues, who in particular, the ones I described as politicians in uniform, took advantage of it to now, since they feared that their king's fools didn't have the resources which you have in the Niger Delta area, the only way to go about it is to legitimately, legally take
legalistically
take from. And this is what they did. In fact, you also know you have the waterland, inland waterways.
Yes.
You know that even a small river in a small part of Shekiri land or in Ogun, any land
That abuts
abuts to the water belongs to the federal government. How ridiculous. This came from a tussle because some people want to acquire land in Osborne, here in Lagos.
Yes.
When there was a deal to acquire land in Osborne, so as to deprive Lagosians, the Lagos state people, to have any control, they decided to make the law that any land close to any river belongs to the federal. This is how ridiculous our federalism has become. And it's not surprising why there are agitations that have even gone to a point of people asking for self-determination.
And the idea of self-determination also, we saw that was part of the problem, that the issues that led to the rise of Adakaboro in the Niger Delta region.
True.
And so on. Well, we fought a civil war, and it turned out that the civil war, when it is being analyzed, people don't really speak about the role that economics played in that civil war on both sides.
True.
That the federal government wanted to make sure that the oil wealth was with the federal government.
True.
And Biafra wanted to make sure that the South-South was part of Biafra, and so on. And nobody asked what the people who lived there wanted. Yes.
That's just true. But the irony of it is, the likes of Odumegwu Ojukwu recognized, and that was why Port Harcourt was one of the greatest cities in Biafra.
Yes.
And some of his key men were actually from President Akwa Ibom in government. You know, so the Odumegwu Ojukwu himself, and by the way too, I was a young student from the military school when this killings was done in the north.
The pogrom.
The pogrom. I was one of the students. My father was a civil servant in Lagos. I was back to school in Form 1 to Zaria. And I was one of the students in the train that was stopped in Jeba, where they were picking out Easterners.
Yes. Because
all Easterners were seen as Nyamri.
Yes.
And they will shoot you, throw you overboard.
Yeah.
I was saved by a friend from Anagatu chap, the people who have been attacked now by herdsmen.
In southern
yes. One
Kaduna.
of my schoolmates called Ibrahim. He came out and said in our coach, oh, this Arewa. So I went past. So I witnessed.
So you just escaped by.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And ongoing.
So this indicated that just as I indicated in my book.
Yes.
That the pogrom, although was targeted at the Igbos, was actually targeted at anybody who was not Yoruba and who was not.
Truly, if you were
if you were Robo, if you were Efik, if you were Do,
indeed,
were,
especially if you were light complexion, and then you looked at Nyamiri, you were dealt with.
My dad had that kind of close
That's
ship
it.
In Lagos.
That's it.
Yes.
So did my dad too.
Yeah.
The whole thing was, when I went back to Zaria, and in fact, luckily, David Mark, former Senate president, mentioned it during the burial of our principal, a great man, General Ogundeko, who died in Jebumushi. We all went there. And David Mark mentioned Ogundeko stood that he'd rather be killed than any of his students to be killed. And I was one of them. And this was the courage of General Ogundeko. He stood and he used his linking with the ex-military school boys and said, look, you cannot allow this happen to your former school boys. That was why, if you watch, there was no killings in Zaria Depot and military school. In fact, Zaria Depot and military school and Sokoto were the only places, that were immune because of the present Sultan's father,
Okay.
who insisted that as Muslims there will be no killing in Sokoto.
Yes.
Apart from there, everywhere there was outside the depot. When you go out of Zaria,
Yes.
there were killings over the place.
Yes.
There is an attitude we have, which I find a high level of and prevalence of ignorance on the question of human rights. Since 13 September 2007, the UN came up with the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People.
Yes.
And that's why Kanu is very calculated in describing himself, the group, as Indigenous Peoples of Biafra. Indigenous as distinct from settlers. So, and really, it is right, I find it very that our ruling elite are so ignorant of the fact that it is the right of anybody, be it Yoruba, Shekiri, my people Boki, to self-determine who they want to coexist with. It is not the same as I see as xenophobic hate speeches.
But that is also part of Kanu's repertoire.
True,
Yes.
true. What I'm saying is that everybody has a right to seek for how he wants to be governed, and the UN declaration says, especially in Articles 3 and 4 and 5.
Yes. The UN talk about indigenous people's rights is being asserted by different kinds of people, and rightly too.
True.
But that right is usually to those people who have been beleaguered, like the indigenous people in the U.S. and the Indians in U.S. in some people in Europe who are indigenous people who have been actually virtually wiped out, even in Turkey, today's Turkey, in New Zealand, Australia, and so on. Why I'm saying this is that during the Jonathan time,
Yes.
when there was a lot of cohabiting between the Igbos and the Jonathan administration, the call for Biafra was mooted. In fact, there were stories about corruption because of some of them looking for parts of the pie in the Jonathan administration. It turned out that some people saw it as an opportunity to make themselves happy in the pocket. But immediately Buhari won the election, there is a tick up in the agitation. So is it a selfish move? Is it that when I am on top, I like Nigeria, when I'm not on top, I hate Nigeria?
I have my second home in Scotland. I'm trying to make a clarification that the indigenous people are not specific to that group of indigenous.
Yeah.
The Scottish people have had Scottish prime ministers in the UK. But as a people, they have a right to seek for their own self-determination. So, in other words, just as the Scots are an ethnic nation, so do the Indigbos, so do Yorubas.
Yeah.
So the point of this UN declaration includes all indigenous people. And in many ways too, you could see, even though I don't agree with Trump.
Oh, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
In many ways, it is an echo of.
He's also trying to fight for the indigenous people who we describe as the Aryan race. That's the whites.
That's it.
He's saying that foreigners are coming and they're taking over my land.
So
when I was in the US, I used to see some whites who were saying, this is not our country anymore.
Sure, sure.
This is not our
Sure.
When they come to the cities, they say, I don't like my country. You want to read this, if you want to see the real America, you go to the rural areas. In other words, that's a code name for whites.
True. So the same way, in other words, so just to show that the indigenous really applies. And it's in fact,
It's about rights. It's about
rights.
what you want.
That's it.
And whether you get it. If you don't get it, you assert it. If you get it, you are quiet.
That's it.
There's a certain injustice and lack of fairness, even about the core and definition of indigenous.
That's it. So I'm happy that it's much more broad.
Yes.
Now, on the other point is this. When I go to the UK, the Kano's group started long before even Jonathan's government. There were already radio stations and network in the UK where they were already talking about indigenous people. It wasn't in
No. They didn't start now.
Yeah, they didn't start
But
now.
they didn't get traction.
Right.
Until Buhari. That's what I'm saying.
Certainly.
Yes.
But I must say, General Buhari didn't help himself in that his inner cabinet was very sectional. The most sectional,
very lopsided.
The most sectional.
Very irresponsibly so.
Indeed, the most sectional. And I must say, it's unlike General Muhammad Buhari I know. So the
when
fault,
you were in the army?
When I was in the army, it was unlike him.
How was he?
Oh, let me finish. I'll come back to that. I think I blame the fault exactly on the likes of people Dr. Junaidu Muhammadu has been blaming. I blame the likes of his uncle, Maman Daura. He is one of the people who has been misleading Muhammad Buhari. And in fact, he's the one Muhammad Buhari's wife was alluding to.
Yes.
He is one of the people who has misled.
When he said, this is not my husband.
Yes. I'm saying the same thing.
Yes.
General Buhari, I know, is not as sectional as his government has turned out to be. You see, in government, the inner cabinet is key. A situation where the chief of staff, secretary of government, the national security advisor, you cannot see anybody good from the southwest that made you play the key part for you to be the president. You cannot see anybody from the Igbo land. I mean, what a pity. So to that extent,
he himself said it after he won the election, that he was going to pay attention to those people who voted for him 90% and so on those who had measly percentages.
But the Yorubas who voted for him, who created the platform for him to be president, he didn't. Yeah. So the point is that the traction IPOP got was in the way how sectional Buhari's inner cabinet was. Some of us actually made interviews on it, and they responded back that it will not be so. But evidentially, over time, it became so. And it's still so.
Now, going back to your narrative about your experience during the program time and your entry into army.
Sure.
Some of these things must have shaped your view of the army over the years until you were involved in that move to unseat the Babangida administration.
In fact, you've got it. I grew up as a young boy in Lagos when it was federal, and I enjoyed the benefits of living in Lagos. I grew up in Yaba, specifically Abuloja, and then eventually Yaba. Then my dad moved on to Surulere, whatever. Now, I left Lagos. Then we went to schools. We were representing the federal. Brigadier Mamalari, myself, Brigadier Marwa, we all left here as if we were sent from Lagos to go to the military school. We went to the military school. Coming from Lagos, we were the pace setters. You know, students in terms of people look up to those who come from Lagos. We were all that. We all grew up in the military. The first thing I reacted, and this is why I can't speak Hausa, but I understand Hausa. I deliberately refused to learn Hausa because in the military, if you couldn't speak Hausa, you were considered. So I asked myself as a young boy that this is not an Hausa army, it is a Nigerian army. and I will not. So they used to call
That's
me.
what Debo Bashon wrote in his book.
Good. No, I experienced it. So they used to say to, I said, no. Hausa language, one of the greatest languages. But I deliberately refused to speak it because it became a language of colonialism, the way I saw it as a young boy. I grew up, some of the best friends were from Hausa land. On interpersonal relationship, Hausas are some of the best people you can be with.
But
They were
institutionally.
indeed, but a word of an Hausa man you can take to the bank compared to my own people or to the Igbo or to Yoruba. The Hausas were very forthright. They were very, but when it came to
institutional,
as we're growing, and now experiencing how things work, we found that there was a cabal. So I went. Luckily for me, I was very fortunate as I was getting commissioned. The president, or later General Olusegun Obasanjo, saw it fit to send myself and another general, now General Akpa, retired, sent us abroad to study in the UK because.
What was your position then?
As I was commissioned, a second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant.
Yes, I was sent to the UK to do myself and Akpa and a few other. Obasanjo then was being accused of being a tribalist because during the Civil War, only Yoruba officers were qualified to be engineers. So people saw Obasanjo as a tribalist. He wasn't really. So when he saw other qualified people from who were the Igbos were not around, who were qualified, he actually gave us much more opportunity than myself, General Ango, who was one-time controller of customs.
Yes.
Many of us, Teddy and all that, he sent us abroad. And so I went abroad, came back, and fortunately when I came back to the country, the know-how I had, I came back and saw a young, vibrant leadership in the military, which was spearheaded by the likes of General Babangida. General Babangida was a man who respected if you had knowledge. He was a man who was at home with people with ideas.
That's a talent.
So he brought us
under his wing
and formed and gave us, encouraged us.
I understand that you were part of Babangida's team to work on
Sure.
What was this program?
To work on, initially, Babangida, being a man of ideas, was fascinated by the French system of government,
yes,
which is parliamentary
and
presidential.
Yes.
And being a man who didn't want to just follow the West, he looked at the Egyptian model,
yes,
which was practically
presidential.
because in Egypt, the president was like the French prime minister.
Yes.
The prime minister, the president is always a military man, yes, or an ex-military man. The prime minister was who runs the government. Was a civilian. So
it's just like what Putin is doing in Russia now.
Oh, all right. I didn't know that. I don't know that.
That's what he's doing.
Right. So he wanted us to study that system. As a way of, then
balancing democracy and autocracy.
Diarchy.
Yeah.
So Babangida had all these ideas. So he brought the team together, and first of all, he embarked on restructuring and modernizing the military. And I give credit to Babangida
for doing that.
He took the military from what it was, basically and essentially an infantry run, foot soldiers run, to a mobile modern force. And luckily for me, I had skills because I had been trained in defense studies in the UK. I brought those skills, and in it, we were able to initiate the reorganization of the military.
Now you remember that Yerima Shetima made this statement about asking the Igbos to leave town, and it was roundly condemned by the governor of Borno State, Kashim Shettima, as well as
Kaduna State.
Kaduna State Governor, and they asked for the arrest of these guys. Last week, Joe Igbokwe was here with another chap who represented the side of Biafra. Joe was saying that it was a balance of terror. And that when you say that you want to leave, you should remember that you have trillions of naira investments everywhere, and you have your own flesh and blood dotted all over the north, and you should understand what was going on. And they saw it as balance of terror, and which is a way of saying that in both cases there has been extremism exhibited, yet they have asked for the arrest of Yerima, and IGP has not arrested him. Yerima is not hiding from anybody. What do you think is going on here?
First of all, I'm surprised that Joe Igbokwe from Nnewi, a freeborn of Nnewi, would say what you are saying.
Well, in the context he was saying it has to be understood that he is for justice for the Southeast, but he is not for secession.
Good.
And he is saying that those people who are calling for secession, one, did not understand that the country has moved past that, and two, that if we want restructuring, everybody wants restructuring, everyone wants a fair federal system, and that the Southeast ought to get its acts together if it wants to get things done, and not by following people like Nnamdi Kanu.
No.
Yeah.
I'm happy that you qualified that, because you would have misrepresented Joe Igbokwe.
Yes.
Now, on the matter, Yerima Shettima is somebody I know well, a good friend. We've met in many. I was surprised that he made that statement too, in that I've seen since his interview qualifying that he's been misunderstood.
Yeah, not that. They said, well, these people say they want to go. What we want to do is to say, okay, if you say you want to go, then go. But he said as a referendum, he has no control over whether a referendum or whether how a referendum will go, or whether it will ever take place.
The ultimatum to leave the North by October 1. That is very dangerous. First of all, that raises a question. First, such statements are indications that we are, to use your terminology, in a near failed state situation. If someone can make such a statement and get away with. Now, secondly, the question needs to be asked, what North is the Arewa Youth Forum talking about?
Exactly.
Is it talking about the North that includes the North Central, whose communities are being attacked, people raped, land being grabbed by armed herdsmen? I'm not sure those people will be part of that North. Is he talking about Northern Christians who, if the Indigbos leave their land, they'll be much more in a harm's way? That the Northern Christians need the Igbos in their midst much more than anybody. In fact, the other. Is he talking about that? Or is he talking about the North ethnic minorities, Northeast, where the Southern Boronu people are being colonized historically? Or is he talking about the Southern Adamawa people who are also, these are people who are seeking to be free from colonization. And this is in the form of, in Southern Borno, they want Savannah State. In Southern Adamawa, they want the state. Or he's talking about the Kaduna people, the Southern Kaduna people, who want Gurara State, whose people are being killed. I'm not sure he's talking about the North. He's talking, I would have thought, the Arewa Forum is really talking about the Arewa areas. It's not talking about the North. The North I would argue that
but you realize too that during the pogrom,
yes,
all of these people existed when everybody who was either Igbo or Southern minority was being wiped out. So it was referring to a center of power in the north that if that threat was not nipped in the bud, had the capacity to generate the kind of anger that led to the slaughter that we experienced in the 1960s.
I'm happy you were citing the example. You see, the willing tools, as Ahmadu Bello described the northern minorities, are no more willing tools. Why? Because they themselves are being murdered.
Exactly.
The Taraba, Plateau, Benue, these people were formerly the willing tools that were being used. So
now, do you think there is progress? I know that you were part of the 2014 group for the national conference.
True.
Now the National Assembly is talking about revisiting the contents of that event. Where do you stand? Do you think that those things can work?
Honestly, Sam, it's most welcoming that the National Senate is asked for the confab report to be brought and for a discussion to be had. I think the underlying point, let's move from what is at stake. The Nigerian nation states, the structure is faulty and is failing. And that's why, if it's not remedied, we will become a failed state. We cannot run away from restoring Nigeria to federalism, as we had prior to 1966. So, any step towards that is welcome. And this is why I even feel that what should be our priority now, it is not regime change, talking about 2019 or whatever. For any people who are wise, what we need is a system change. Systems are so important. If we have a proper system, or if we go back to the proper system, things will work. You can see the power.
How do you define the proper system? Because the issue of federalism and restructuring sometimes makes it look like it is a 1 + 1 = 2 problem. I remember giving a talk at the University of Ibadan sometime last year, and the student just said, "So do you mean if there is restructuring today, we agree to restructure this country, then our problems are solved?"
Can I say, I would refer those students, and I'm happy you see the University of Ibadan?
Yeah.
Good. That they should read Awo's books. Awo had predicted in his writings that once you temper with federalism, as it's been tempered with, we may end up like Yugoslavia has ended.
Good question.
Now, two, the issue is, I don't believe in this terminology, restructuring. The British, as bad as they were, recognized that for a multi-ethnic people like we are, that federalism is the way out.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that people who are oligarchs...
And they did it gradually.
Yes, who are oligarchs, who want to deceive us, we cannot run away from federalism. So when you ask me the question, what's the proper system? The proper system is, look at America, how things are working out. People at times talk of powerful leadership. Trump came as a powerful leader. He can't move because the system
has held him
down. So system is very important. What are systems? Systems is where you have interdependent workings, output, input.
It's a system where values and the rule of law work together.
That's it.
But sometimes we can have rule of law and where a judge can come out and rule even against justice. And then it's against values. So we need to have justice.
Yes.
We have to have rule of law.
That's it.
Then federalism can work.
No. A good example over the years,
Yeah.
as I always use the example of India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
Pakistan went the strong way,
Yeah.
which Nigeria at times recurrently goes
Yeah.
to. India kept on to democracy.
Yes.
There's corruption in India,
A lot of it.
but things are working better.
I think it's one of the fifth, no, like the sixth or seventh. It's not the G8 yet, but it's close.
Yeah, it's close.
Yeah.
Now, they're growing.
They're the fifth largest military in the world.
That's it, and one of the best. Now, what I'm trying to say is that we need to allow democracy to work. And for democracy to work in Nigeria, you have to allow the federal system to work. Without going democracy alone, or the so-called democracy without federalism, becomes a contradiction in Nigerian setting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've had here for our big talk today, Colonel Tony Nyiam. You're really welcome here for giving us something of your own experience.
Thank you.
In Nigeria military and also Nigerian history as a player in critical parts of our country. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Okay. Thank you for being a part of the show today. Join me next week, though, for another edition of the program. And until then, be good.